the story. Firstly, I need to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank all of you, thank you, all of you, because today I'm filming this on Saturday night, and this morning I reached 500 subscribers. 500 subscribers, and I am so super grateful for all 500 obvious that once upon a time they had been very swanky residences, but now, even in the darkness, he could see that the paint was peeling from the woodwork on their doors and windows, and that the handsome white facades were cracked and blotchy from neglect. Suddenly, in a downstairs window that was brilliantly illuminated by a street lamp, gentle blue eyes. I was on my way to the Bell and Dragon, Billy told her, but the notice in your window just happened to catch my eye. My dear boy, she said, why don't you just come in out of the cold? How much do you charge? Asked Billy. 5 and 6 pence a night, including breakfast. It was fantastically cheap. It was less than half of what he had been willing to pay. If that is too much, she added, then perhaps I can reduce it just a tiny bit. Do you desire breakfast? Breakfast is expensive at the moment. It would be 6 pence less without the breakfast. 5 and 6 pence is fine, he answered. I should like very much to stay here. I knew you would. Do come in. She seemed terribly nice. She looked exactly like the mother of one's best school friend, welcoming one into the house to stay for the Christmas holidays. Billy took off his hat and stepped over the threshold. Just hang it there, she said, and let me help you with your coat. There were no other hats or coats in the hall. There were no umbrellas, no walking sticks, nothing. We have it all to ourselves, she said, smiling at him over her shoulder as she led the way upstairs. You see, it isn't very often I have the pleasure of taking a visitor into my little nest. The old girl is slightly dotty, Billy told himself, but at 5 and 6 pence a night, who gives a damn about that? I should have thought you'd be simply swamped with applicants, he said politely. Oh, I am, my dear. I am, of course I am. But the trouble is that I'm inclined to be just a teeny weeny bit choosy and particular, if you see what I mean. Oh, yeah, Billy said. But I'm always ready. Everything is always ready, day and night in this house, just on the off chance that an acceptable young gentleman will come along. And it is such a pleasure, my dear, such a very great pleasure when, now and again, I open the door and I see someone standing there who is just exactly right. She was halfway up the stairs, and she paused with one hand on the stair rail, turning her head and smiling down at him with pale lips. Like you, she added, and her blue eyes travelled slowly all the way down the length of Billy's body to his feet, and then up again. On the first floor landing, she said to him, "This floor is mine." They climbed up a second flight, and this one is all yours, she said. Here's your room. I do hope you'll like it. She took him into a small but charming front bedroom, switching on the light as she went in. The morning sun comes right in the window, Mr. Perkins, she said. It is Mr. Perkins, isn't it? No, he said. It's Weaver. Mr. Weaver, how nice She was also quite obviously a kind and gentle soul. He guessed that she had probably lost a son in the war, or something like that, and never gotten over it. So, a few minutes later, after unpacking his suitcase and washing his hands, he trotted downstairs to the ground floor and entered the living room. His landlady wasn't there, but the fire was glowing in the hearth, and the little dachshund was still sleeping in front of it. The room was wonderfully warm and cosy. I'm a lucky fellow, he thought, rubbing his hands. This is a bit of all right. He found the guest book lying open on the piano, so he took out his pen and wrote down his name and address. There were only 2 other entries above his on the page, and as one always does with guest books, he started to read them. One was a Christopher Mulholland from Cardiff. The other was a Gregory W. Temple from Bristol. That's funny, he thought suddenly. Christopher Mulholland. It rings a bell. Now, where on earth had he heard that rather unusual name before? Was he a boy at school? No. Was it one of his sister's numerous young men, perhaps? Or a friend of his father's? No, it wasn't any of those. He glanced down again at the book. Can you see? That's what's written in the book. It says, Christopher Mulholland, 231 Cathedral Road, Cardiff. And then on a separate line it says, Gregory W. Temple, 27 Sycamore Drive, Bristol. As a matter of fact, now he came to think of it, he wasn't at all sure that the second name didn't have almost as much of a familiar ring about it as the first. Gregory Temple, he said aloud, searching his memory. Christopher Mulholland. Such charming boys. A voice behind him answered, and he turned and saw his landlady sailing into the room with a large silver tea tray in her hands. She was holding it well out in front of her and rather high up, as though the tray were a pair of reins on a horse. They sound somehow familiar, he said. They do. How interesting. I'm almost positive I've heard those names before somewhere. Isn't that odd? Maybe it was in the newspapers. They weren't famous in any way, were they? I mean, famous cricketers or footballers or something like that. Famous, she said, setting the tea tray down on the low table in front of the sofa. Oh no, I don't think they were famous, but they were extraordinarily handsome, both of them, I can promise you that. They were tall and young and handsome, my dear, just exactly like you. Once more, Billy glanced down at the book. Look here, he said, noticing the dates. The last entry is over 2 years old. It is. Yes, indeed, and Christopher Mulholland's is nearly a year before that, more than 3 years old. Dear me, she said, shaking her head and heaving a dainty little sigh. I would never have thought it. How time does fly away from us all, doesn't it, Mr. Wilkins? It's Weaver, Billy said. W-E-A-V-E-R. Oh, of course it is, she cried, sitting down on the sofa. How silly of me. I do apologize. In one ear and out the shouldn't bother," Billy said. "I didn't mean you to do anything like that." He stood by the piano, watching her as she fussed about with the cups and saucers. He noticed that she had small, white, quickly moving hands and red fingernails. "I'm almost positive it was in the newspapers I saw them," Billy said. "I'll think of it in a second, I'm sure I will." There is nothing more tantalizing than a thing like this, which lingers just outside the borders of one's memory. He hated to give up. "Now wait a minute," he said. "Wait just a minute. Mulholland. Christopher Mulholland. Wasn't that the name of the Eton schoolboy who was on a walking tour through the West Country, and then all of a sudden—" "Do you take sugar?" she said. Yes, please." "Then all of a sudden—" "Eton schoolboy," she said. "Oh no, my dear, that can't possibly be right, because my Mr. Mulholland was certainly not an Eton schoolboy when he came to me. He was a Cambridge undergraduate. Come over here now and sit next to me and warm yourself in front of this lovely fire. Come on, your tea's all ready for you." She patted the empty place beside her on the sofa, and she sat there smiling at Billy and waiting for him to come over. He crossed the room slowly and sat down on the edge of the sofa. She placed his teacup on the table in front of him. "There we are," she said. "How nice and cozy is this, isn't it?" Billy started sipping his tea. She did the same. For half a minute or so, neither of them spoke, but Billy knew that she was looking at him. Her body was half turned towards him, and he could feel her eyes resting on his face, watching him over the rim of her teacup. Now and again he caught a whiff of a peculiar smell that seemed to emanate directly from her person. It was not in the least unpleasant, and it reminded him, well, he wasn't quite sure what it reminded him of. Pickled walnuts, maybe, or a new car smell, or was it the corridors of a hospital? Mr. Mulholland was a great one for his tea, she said at length. "Never in my life have I seen anyone drink as much tea as dear, sweet Mr. Mulholland." "I suppose he left fairly recently," Billy said. He was still puzzling his head about the two names. He was positive now that he had seen them in the newspapers, in the headlines. "Left," she said, arching her brows. "But my dear boy, he never left. He's still here. Mr. Temple is also still here. They're on the 3rd floor, both of them, together." Billy sat down his cup slowly on the table and stared at the landlady. She smiled back at him, and then she put one of her white hands out and patted him comfortingly on the knee. "How old are you, my dear?" she said. 17, said Billy. 17, she cried. "Oh, it's the perfect age. Mr. Mulholland was also 17, but I think he was a trifle shorter than you are. In fact, I'm sure he was, and his teeth weren't quite so white. You have the most beautiful teeth, Mr. Weaver. Did you know that?" "They're not as good as they look," Billy said. "They've got simply masses of fillings in them at the back." "Mr. Temple, of course, was a little older," she said, ignoring his remark. "He was actually 28, and yet I would never have guessed it if he hadn't told me. a pause. Billy picked up his teacup and took another sip of his tea. Then he set it down again, gently in its saucer. He waited for her to say something else, but she seemed to have lapsed into another one of her silences. He sat there staring straight ahead of him into the far corner of the room, biting his lower lip. "That parrot," he said at last. "You know something? It had me completely fooled when I first saw it through the window from the street. I could have sworn it was alive. Alas, no longer," the landlady said. "It's most terribly clever the way it's been done," said Billy. "It doesn't look the least bit dead. Who did it?" "I did," she said. "You did," he said. "Of course," she said. "And have you met my little Basil as well?" She nodded towards the dachshund curled up so comfortably in front of the fire. Billy looked at it, and suddenly he realized that the animal had all the time been just as silent and motionless as the parrot. He put out a hand and touched it gently on the top of its back. The back was cold, and when he pushed the